What is going on? Have just installed a firing pin lifter spacer in my CZ97. It's the exact same if you do it to a CZ75. I thought I would quick show a video of it in detail and explain why I put it in the gun. So I removed the firing pin block from my CZ97. I'm not suggesting that you do that, but I'm making this video in case maybe you have removed it. If you remove the firing pin block, that's fine. You don't have to. The firing pin lifter is still in the gun, but it's not bothering anything. It's just when you pull the trigger, it's lifting up, trying to push the firing pin block, but the firing pin block's not there, so it's just lifting up into an airspace. So you don't necessarily have to take this out of the gun. Some people are saying go ahead and grind this down, but what difference does that make? It's going up into airspace. It's not hurting anything that's there. Now, that's how my gun was. There's a little spring that goes in behind it. Here's a little spring. If I could pick it up. Well, I can't pick it up. It's too small. There we go. No, it just flew somewhere. Are you serious? Anyway, there was a little spring there, and that's all been taken out of the gun now. So basically that's how my gun was. The firing pin block had been removed, and I'm still looking for that spring. Doesn't matter, I'll find it after the video's over. And then I'm reading and I see a firing pin lifter spacer. So I disassemble my gun, field strip it, and I'm just looking at this, and I'm just kind of cocking the hammer and just watching in there and watching where the right here, that's the firing pin lifter spacer that I just installed right there. Now that's where this firing pin lifter used to be. Now upon inspection, pretend the firing pin lifter was in the gun. I was looking at it, I'm like, let's see, well, why do they make this spacer? Because I was seeing that they said that the spacer shortens your trigger reset. So I was just trying to look at it and mechanically see how it shortened the trigger reset. And while I was inspecting it, I was kind of cocking the hammer, pulling the trigger and watching the firing pin lifter lift up, and then the hammer break, and then I would watch it reset, and I would watch what it was doing. And I noticed when I cocked the hammer, the creep, the creep in the trigger before the trigger breaks. Right there, that's the creep. Okay, the hammer's cocked, and that's I don't know if you can see that. See the parts moving? This part here, I'm not sure what it's called. It was right next to where the firing pin lifter was. I noticed that there's friction there. There, that's the creep, and I'll try to do it, and I'll watch it creep and then break. And then it broke. So there's... Okay, now I noticed while I was doing that, pulling the trigger, watching that firing pin lifter lift, and I was watching these parts move, and I noticed that this firing pin lifter, when it would go up, it seemed like it was kind of like it's got a spring behind it that flew, but the spring inside there, it almost seemed like it had a little bit of this action going on. As it was lifting, it almost seemed like it had a little play in it like this, like it was just a little kind of sloppy. Because you see how this is. You see how this is all cut out? Well, filling in that space is where the spring is. Now, this whole part here is solid, so it really shouldn't have play in it. You know, one thing I didn't do is I didn't put the spacer next to this piece. I don't know if it's a bit bigger or not. But anyway, to make a long story short, I was like, well, let me get the spacer. I get the spacer. See, what I should have done is I should have physically looked at it. Well, I could probably do it now. Well, see, they look to be the same thickness. Yeah, maybe they are. Anyway, this spacer seems to fit in there nice and snug. Maybe it wasn't. It was just an illusion that this was kind of sloppy. I don't know. You know what? See, I think it is more solid because this piece is as thick as the spacer, but only on one side, whereas the spacer goes all the way around, so it's supported around the whole thing. And yeah, the spring is in here, and the spring is supporting it, but not as solid as the spacer. So there you go, right? You can see, and you can see it. You can see this piece here. It's just a more perfectly fit evenly around the pin that goes through for your safety. So it makes all this more stable. Now what I'm saying is, when I was inspecting it, I was feeling that, like, where that creep is, and it was kind of crunchy. That's with the firing pin lifter intact. Now that the firing pin lifter spacer is in there, it's still a little bit gritty, but it's not as bad as it was. It's definitely smoother. Now I polished the firing pin spacer before I put it in with metal polish. This came from Ghost CZ shop, the CZ shop in Arizona. It says Ghost Products or whatever, and it came with some surface rust on it. One side, it kind of had some grooves in it. I thought it could have been a nicer machined piece. It costs $5 for a washer. Not that that's expensive, but I would have expected a more finely machined piece than what it was. But it does fit in there very snug, and I metal polished it before I put it in, and you can see that there is friction where that creep in your trigger is between this piece and the firing pin lifter spacer. So basically, if you're contemplating on putting this in your gun, now it's supposed to shorten the trigger reset. I'm not exactly sure how it does that. I couldn't really figure it out if there's slop where the spring was. I couldn't physically see. I'm getting ready to just throw the slide back on and check the trigger reset. But it is supposed to shorten the trigger reset. But it doesn't look like that's its only positive benefit. This is a more solid piece now, and there's no, you're not looking at any side to side movement from the piece that's moving. Only this piece is moving, and it's perfectly up and down, and you don't have that. Almost looked like it had wobble in it. You know what I mean? It was kind of grindy and just wasn't moving real free. It just had too much, the way it was machined, it just had too much slop in it. So this definitely got rid of that slop, and it's going to have a shorter trigger reset. So that's why I put it in the gun, and it only cost $5. So I'm glad I put it in, and it's kind of a pain to take all this out, but it can be done. Basically, you push that pin out, but you have to lift up that little spring right there. Lift that little, because that spring right there is in a groove, and then slide it out and take all this out. And it's a pain to put it back in. When you put it back in, you got to push your, there's a little spring inside here for the detent for your safety. when you're sliding this whole safety with the pin back in, you got to take a little screwdriver and pull that spring back to get this to go all the way back in. Then make sure that spring is in that groove. It should just naturally fall in, but everything should move. You know, it should be safety with the hammer cocked, and then with it all the way down, you know, it can't go on safe. But guys, that's for $5. That's a pretty cool mod, and it looks like I can already tell it's made the trigger smoother, because that's where I've seen guys polishing all this, and there's no friction. There's no friction anywhere on that, except right here. I could see polishing there, but that's already getting polished from the gun just firing. But they're polishing this whole thing. What for? It's not touching anything. It's not touching the sides of the frame either. You can't see it in the video, but none of that's touching. So, you know, you're wasting your time. All that was smooth. This trigger pull was all smooth. You know, where I noticed it was gritty was in where that creep was when this piece was moving. And I sprayed all this with Ballistol, and I put a light coat of Ballistol on the pin that goes through there. I think it was kind of dry from the factory and everything. So make sure you lubricate all this. Lubricate inside by your hammer. Spray a little Ballistol down in there, and plus with that spacer in there, and that made the trigger a lot better. I mean, it is really smooth now. So that's pretty cool. Anyway, I'm going to put this all back together, and I just thought I'd just give you a look at that and kind of explain a little bit about it. So, alright, see you later.